I wear lots of hats at NIH. My day job is the Translational Devices Team Lead at NINDS, but I have roles within the Brain Initiative, the HEAL Initiative, the SPARK program, and the Blueprint MedTech program. So if you have questions about a lot of these programs, feel free to find me later during the meeting, and I can help you address those. For those that haven't heard about it yet, the Blueprint MedTech program was approved in 2020. We launched in 2022. Good news, so this spring, our leadership approved the program for renewal up through at least 2030. So we've extended the duration of the program now. It's supported by 12 participating institutes and centers across NIH. So, roughly about half of the institutes that fund projects. And the program overall includes 2 different incubator hubs that help to provide some of the early stage funding for projects to move along the pipeline. The entry point for the program, as we kind of set it up, is for groups that already have that preclinical proof of concept and are looking to try and scale up towards their human prototype. Our incubator hubs program will support preclinical development. So additional kind of device development activities, validation, verification, any sort of non-GLP or GLP animal studies, biocomp, kind of those types of things. And for the projects that are kind of earlier stage or may have some gaps in there, we'll support kind of small seedlings, grand total of about $100K that includes some money for the investigators, some money for consultants, as well as about 6 months of mentorship. Our larger development projects are on the order of about $500,000. Direct cost per year could go up to 4 years, plus roughly a similar amount of in-kind resources in the program. And then for the later stage projects, we have more traditional NIH cooperative agreement mechanisms as part of our translator program to really support that jump to human studies. So here's kind of a summary overall of kind of the stages of development. As I mentioned, the various different activities that will support there. In particular, keeping in mind that when I mentioned in-kind resources, this could include help with design, prototyping, bench testing, any sort of business development activities, provide you access to consultants, industry experts, regulatory compliance, quality support, biocomp and animal studies, clinical support, both in terms of your overall trial design and planning to kind of your implementation, scale up, and any sort of data safety monitoring plans and committees that you have as well. And so, I've had lots of questions over the last few months. As I mentioned, luckily the program has been renewed. We have this note on our website here that provides this note. Our funding opportunities, both the UG3, UH3 that's open to all investigators, as well as the U44 is open to small business investigators. These are for the later stage, so projects that are ready to make that jump into humans. The program is renewed, the concepts have been cleared in our May Council. We're working on the renewals for those, so keep an eye open for those funding opportunities to come back. One kind of caveat to look at both across our MedTech program and across others, given a lot of budget uncertainty that many people may or may not be aware of. A lot of our programs are shifting from what was kind of 3 due dates a year to maybe 1 or 2. So keep an eye out that there may be fewer opportunities that you may need to plan ahead and make sure that you apply. And beyond just me, there are plenty of people on our Blueprint MedTech core team across the 4 co-lead institutes that are running the program, and there are staff available at all of the participating institutes and centers that are also participating, including the Brain and the HEAL Initiative that are also available. All of these contact information are available on our website. The various different institutes have highlights of the types of projects that they may be interested in supporting. So be sure to check out that, as well as kind of reach out to us with an abstract or a summary of what you're working on, and we can tell you where this might fit within the program. Beyond that, just kind of a brief snippet. Our NINDS Translational Devices program, this one is specific to only our institute, the Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, was also just recently reissued, I believe last week now, making a note that SRF, government speak, we're through various different NIH opportunities, they're implementing a simplified review framework, which changes the review criteria pretty substantially in a large number of the funding opportunities across NIH. So those that have applied previously, make sure you look carefully at the funding opportunities that are rolling out, as the requirements and the review criteria may have changed pretty substantially. This particular program, the way that we've structured it, is it really is open to low risk, non-significant risk studies and technologies, in that sort of late stage non-clinical testing in the R61 of the fast track phase award, and then supporting an early stage clinical feasibility study in the second phase. And so these are open and available for those that are in the significant risk space, that needing an IPE, those ones where we're directing to the MedTech program instead. And similarly, we have our team here. Our email addresses across the bottom there, ninds-devices@nih.gov, that mailbox to reach our whole team, and we can provide additional support and help. And then just a high-level overview to keep in mind, there are many brain initiative opportunities available that support activities from early stage concept generation all the way through kind of later stage clinical trials programs. As I mentioned earlier, the one thing to be wary of and cognizant of is the brain initiative in last fiscal year had about a 40% budget cut. So lots of the due dates for these programs have been cut. We're still awaiting our budget for this fiscal year. So we're operating under continuing resolution, which means we still don't know what our budget is going to be. And it still could be even further up in the air with events over the last 24 hours. So lots of uncertainty on the NIH side of things. Beyond that, just kind of talking about that our HEAL initiative so far has not suffered any large budget cuts. So opportunities there. The HEAL initiative supports technologies focused on treating pain and opioid use disorder, opportunities to support the preclinical development, as well as those later stage projects that are ready to go into humans. The Blueprint MedTech program that I mentioned, the HEAL initiative has signed on to the program and is willing to support projects both in the incubator hub and some of our other funding mechanisms, as well as those earlier stage first in human studies. And the other one to make a big call out to is this HEAL Interdisciplinary Team Science RFA. In our alphabet soup, it's an RM1, but really the goal here is to uncover the mechanisms of pain relief by approved and cleared medical devices. So tying into the previous discussion, you know, there's lots of potential questions and uncertainty as to when TENS may work and be helpful for patients compared to spinal cord stimulation, compared to some of these other non-invasive or implantable technologies as they're coming onto the market. And keeping with all of those in mind, this is where we're open to team science projects to help understand the mechanisms, maybe help to identify biomarkers, maybe help to try and understand how to stratify which patients are most likely to benefit from these technologies in an objective way. The mechanism will support both preclinical studies, if there are relevant animal models that can help better answer some of these questions, as well as mechanistic clinical trials to look at that. So with that, I will thank everybody for the time, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll be around all day today and tomorrow.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, Nick. That was a great overview. And again, want to just put out a thank, not just to Nick, but the entire team at the NIH over the years has really been a critical player in the growth of the neurotechnology industry. I think it would be hard pressed for me to, in a few minutes to itemize the number of successful neurotech companies that got their start with funding from various NIH programs. So it's very important to keep that in mind, particularly if someone were ever to tell you that government is not the solution, it's the problem. Well, it's been a good solution for a few companies in our industry. So thank you, NIH, and thank you, Nick. I'd now like to ask our other panelists. We have Suraj Muditala from Action Potential. Would you like to give us a quick overview of your firm, and then we'll ask Jordy to do the same.
Thanks, Jim. Maybe quickly, so Action Potential, we're a firm that was founded back in 2013 by GlaxoSmithKline, where we own it and backed by GSK. The initial kind of thesis behind Action Potential was to invest in technologies that could kind of fundamentally disrupt the pharmaceutical world that we live in. GSK at the time brought together a think tank of top scientists, engineers, et cetera, to identify technologies and modalities by which that can be achieved. Landed on neuromodulation as kind of a focus area. And so started two initiatives. One was Action Potential Venture Capital. Over the last 10 years, we've kind of built a portfolio of mostly neuromodulation companies as kind of the first step, and continue to remain bullish on the thesis that medical technologies, devices, et cetera, that can supplement, augment, or disrupt pharmaceuticals have significant value. We've had a few entrepreneurs up here already today that have exemplified that. So in terms of our investment remit, we typically invest $5 million up front. We've invested roughly $170 million to date over the lifetime of our existence.
Okay, thank you. And Jordy, you want to tell us a little bit about Neurotech?
Yes, hi everybody. Our firm is called Nexus Neurotech Venture. It's very known. It only has a year of life. Before that, my background was operational, working in medtech companies. The last 2 years I was at Google in health, and before that I spent many years at Boston Scientific. And before that, I was at Advanced Ionics, which was one of the initial early startups in the space of neuromodulation. And by the way, I checked, the Advanced Ionics was acquired by Boston Scientific in 2004 by post-earnout sum of $3 billion, which adjusted by inflation is around $5 billion today.
Okay, so you're going to refuse my claim that Exxon's deal was a big, okay.
We were talking absolute dollars.
And adjusted for inflation, you're probably right, okay. And it was multiple deals.
It was multiple deals, very complicated, and Jen knows all about that. But it was a very interesting journey, at least for me personally, to navigate through the journey of a startup becoming more complicated, larger company, and through an acquisition become part of a larger company, etc. So gives you a perspective of the different constraints that companies have as they try to do their best. Always in the space of neuromod. When I went to Google, it was almost it was a bunch of other things too. I did a lot of cardio, diabetes, and surgical robotics, and things like this. Since last year, though, I had the privilege to go back to the brain, which is what I wanted to do, and so our venture firm exclusively only focuses on brain disorders, and from a tech perspective. So we don't invest in drug development, but anything that has a kind of like these ones and zeros and hardware and software, then it's in scope for us, as long as it fits the clinical indication targets that we have, which right now are limited to only a few indications. One of them being Parkinson's disease, and some of the kind of comorbidities of that. For example, cognitive decline is something that's often associated with Parkinson's disease. We're also very interested in autism, and it's a hard space, but all these developmental indications have, I think, there's a lot of need in the society to have better solutions. And also neuropsychiatric disorders too, depression and bipolar disorder is of interest. So for now, we're limited on that, but anything that has a software solution, data platform, drug device combination, drug discovery tool, to medical devices for interventions, either invasive or non-invasive, it's something of our target. We've been deploying capital quite rapidly. So in the last year, we deployed or allocated almost like 150 million. Either directly or through co-investments with our primary LP. And we're just starting the second fund. So we deploy capital across the entire spectrum of checks. So we do have, and John Probst is over there, is heading our incubator. So if you guys have ideas that you need funding on a very early stage, we do have the capacity to look at that, all the way to checks that have been as large as $50 million. And also we can influence the very large family offices we work with in allocating grants and philanthropic dollars as well. So that the hope is for us is less on a specific targets of checks is this investment fitting a strategic clinical need that we see in the few clinical indications that we're focusing on. And almost all these indications have a very long patient journey, take a long time. So there's all these entry points from a diagnostic or interventional perspective that can add value. So that's how I would look at the world, not as a basket of companies in our portfolio that are all disconnected. We're looking at from the ecosystem perspective of the company we're investing, how they are connected to each other and to the patients.
Thank you, Jody, and apologize for bungling your name. Neuronexus was actually a firm started by Daryl Kupke to market probes. Nexus Neurotech, of course, is a different type of firm. So in a moment, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. I think we have some startup entrepreneurs here who would love to throw some questions your way. But I'm going to start with a couple of questions. We spoke earlier about the impact of a big exit, whether the Axonics deal was the biggest ever, or maybe the second biggest if you adjust for it. It's a big deal. And so I'd be interested to hear from each of you what you think the impact of a deal like that has been on the immediate climate for neurotech startups. Is it something that adjusts valuation? Is it something that makes your limited partners more excited? Just kind of any general observations. Suraj, you want to start?
Sure, thanks. So it's interesting, I think in the last year through Q3, there's been more M&A activity than all of 2023. So the M&A activity in medtech specifically has grown substantially. What has that done? It's actually increased two things. One, it's increased the competition for M&A deals amongst the strategics. Many of those strategics have kind of increased their balance sheet reserves and are looking for opportunistic kind of acquisition targets. But now you've also got kind of a new dynamic with the two recent IPOs. One of them was Cerebell, which is kind of in the space. I wouldn't say it's neuromodulation, of course, but still in the space. And what that now does is it puts pressure again back on the strategics to say, listen, you're not the only game in town. The IPO market is going to open up probably next year. We're hopeful, and that increases the opportunity set for exit. So you talk about an exit, whether it's a big acquisition or a company going public, it does a few things. One, it increases the opportunity set for entrepreneurs as they go and market their companies to VCs. I think VCs, of course, will benchmark based on exits and will determine their valuations for any given company based on the likely exit potential of that market or investment. And then two, you mentioned this point about LPs. I mean, when we talk to GSK, we often benchmark on, listen, Axonics, Shockwave, there's Relievant, there were a handful of big acquisitions that occurred recently. We're very bullish on our portfolio, of course. We think that our portfolio is ripe for those same types of exits, especially as the IPO markets open up, and now the strategics are kind of going to have to think a little bit harder about what the value of that M&A activity is going to have to be going forward. So all in all, I think it does a lot. It's all positive, right? I think when Cerebell came out a few weeks ago, everyone was kind of wondering how it would do. The fact that it's trading at a 10+x forward-looking revenue multiple is a massive benefit, whereas medtech has not fared so well in the public markets over the last couple of years. So seeing those big wins really helps the space categorically. And I think, we should all be rooting for those companies because ultimately that will increase the capital allocation to our asset class specific to the medtech sector. So I think it's all positive.
Yeah, and by the way, not to keep plugging the attendee handouts, but there is a profile of Cerebell, including their most recent IPO and the current issue of Neurotech Business Report, which is included in your handouts. They're digital handouts. They're not hard copy. We gave up on print about a year ago. I know it was hard, but we're now digital only. Jody, do you want to respond to that question?
Just a comment that for sure all these things are very helpful. At the same time, and you listen to Ray talk before when he started listing, okay, there's 2 successful companies and there's 25 unsuccessful companies. The medtech space continues to be still an area where it's seen as very, very high risk from a return of capital because it's not like biopharma where you can use the 2% outlier with 100 times return to offset all these other losses. It just that's not structurally how medtech is built. So that kind of a statistical game is not really applicable here. So that increases a lot the perception of the risk of the return. So it's a tough market, but it also requires a lot of commitment and understanding there are no shortcuts in healthcare. And particularly we are early investors, it's like you're not going to have any money back anytime soon. There are no short-term exits. It's not like you finish a phase or a preclinical work and you're going to sell a company. So it's you do have to have a lot of conviction and perseverance and patience. It's not everything is rosy for sure.
And, maybe adding a slightly different spin, big deals in the community, well, in general are great for the community. They almost make my job harder, right? Because a lot of this challenge of government funding is we're trying to operate in that space of, we're trying to help groups where there isn't readily available capital, to help move things along so that when you get these very large deals or large investments across the spectrum, internally, it can be, okay, well, like these groups are already raising capital. Do they really need this extra, $500,000 or $1 million from NIH when maybe we should better spend that someplace else? So
a very good point.
Strategic decisions go the opposite.
Very good point, Nick, and I mean this in the kindest way. There are probably several people in this room that would like to see you put out of business for that reason. Going back to the Exonics deal, we just had a wonderful presentation from Ray Cohen. One of the points he made was when you're a startup going up against a major player, particularly if they're the only game in town, you should be ready to anticipate what they experienced, which was, an IP battle, which they won in the end, but it cost them $30 million in the process. Is this something that you would advise your portfolio firms to take into consideration? Is this something that has to be adjusted in the term sheet, whether they're going to be facing a major and we all know that you do the due diligence and you can say, yeah, of course they have freedom to operate, but that's not going to prevent someone from suing, especially if it's a big company who's worried that your startup might be taking some market share. How do you deal with that? How do you account for the risk? How do you underwrite it? And what guidance and counsel do you give to your portfolio firms who might be in that situation?
Well, I lived through that because my first journey with Advanced Ionics, we had a big lawsuit also with Medtronic for years. So this is particularly relevant if you have a fast forward approach, where the Bionics did or what Ray did was basically trying to go to the same market, competing directly with an existing incumbent that with the reimbursement available and try to get market share. And that is prone to an IP battle. It's unavoidable. And so I think the question is where you can get the capital to make sure that you have a good legal battle here because it's unavoidable. Most of our investments, we don't particularly are interested in fast forward approaches of existing market and getting market share. We go for more white spaces and higher risk and novel things. And that's why the FTOs and both the defensive and offensive strategies in the IP perspective is a critical component of our due diligence. And we spend a lot of efforts making sure that they have what it needs to survive.
Right. Yeah, I don't have too much more to add to that. I mean, I think it's usually our late stage companies that would run into those sorts of IP issues as they're entering the market. I think, being ready to go out and raise enough capital to shore up your balance sheet for that battle is wise. I actually think medtech tends to be less less of an IP battleground than other sectors in healthcare, like especially on the tool side, which is somewhat of a benefit. But I think we do what we can during diligence. We shore up our IP kind of fort and prepare for capital.
Okay. Appreciate that feedback on the impact of the Exonics deal. There's another bit of news in the last couple of weeks. You may have seen a report issued by Morgan Stanley, which estimated the total addressable market for BCIs to be $400 billion. Did you take a look at that? Do you have any idea? Obviously, the BCI startup executives were very pleased. Many of them took to social media and commented on what this meant for their particular firm. Do reports like this, whether you buy everything in it or not, it's from a reputable financial firm, do they make a difference in terms of the general climate or the specific decision to invest or not invest in, let's say, a BCI company?
Yeah, I can start with maybe I'll start with or my take on kind of the decision to invest or how we assess the companies. I mean, I think ultimately the $400 billion TAM is, overblown. I think the way to think about this in terms of segments of the market, I mean, if you read the report, they kind of broke it out into, upper level, they kind of broke out a variety of different kind of subsegments of applications, call it. And what they don't, and I didn't read the full report in detail, but my guess is what they probably didn't focus on is kind of all of the blocking and tackling that's required for each specific indication when you actually go out and try to commercialize those devices, right? So it's not fair to say that, this one platform technology can immediately go out, get approval, and then commercialize a variety of different applications from the get-go. Ray talked a lot about, and a few others have talked a lot about kind of all the infrastructure that's required in terms of reimbursement and building out a sales force, and now you're competing in indications that have alternative modalities of therapy. So it's not like, I think this idea that BCI is really an exciting technology, you're reading and writing directly to the brain. Of course, I think there's going to be a lot of hype around that, but ultimately you kind of have to go indication by indication and determine whether or not, is a neurosurgical approach where you're implanting a lead in someone's brain the best way to treat an indication? I mean, it's a very invasive, all of these devices are very invasive, even the least invasive version of them, right? So it's, I think it's great from a hype cycle kind of perspective. I think it brings a lot of attention to medtech. Medtech as a sector is kind of often has this kind of stigma of being quote unquote unsexy. I think BCI brings a little bit of that too. JoJo's frowning, but she disagrees. But yeah, so yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, and by the way, in defense of Morgan Stanley, not that it's my job to defend Morgan Stanley, but their report didn't say this was immediate. They broke it down, that 400 billion was broken down to $80 billion in the next 5 years, and then 320 beyond that, okay? And in terms of making market projections, they're still saying that's 4+ more years down the road, which is, a little more real world than if you just look at the 400 billion figure by itself. But Jordy, your thoughts on the BCI market in general and what?
Very similar. I don't think these numbers mean too much. $400 billion. We're not looking at the world from this perspective because it's I think it can be easily misleading to actually try to focus on the right things, which is what is the clinical unmet need that this technology will address, that somebody will be willing to prescribe and somebody else will be willing to pay for, right? That's the kind of, so then you go one at a time. What I think is interesting for us in BCI, so right now BCI doesn't overlap with our critical clinical indication, so it's not direct target, but the tech development and some of the side effects of that effort might be downstream valuable for us. So that way we keep a look into this because better technologies that can have either invasive or less invasive that can have better access to the brain will find a way to have a path for clinical value across many different diseases. So over time, but right now we're not investing in that.
Okay. And before we leave the subject of BCI, just curious to get your impression. Elon Musk, net positive or net negative for the industry?
I think that I attract a lot of capital, right? So that's your work in BCI is definitely net positive because there's much more money to do things that the work in the desert 20 years. So all this. So I think overall, that excitement is good. I think I think the valuations are really creative, frankly, so I'm not sure if it makes sense from an investment perspective, but the more money you have to solve tough problems, something good will end up coming out of it.
Yeah.
Just don't know exactly what.
So, Suraj, anything you want to say about Elon? And before you answer, do keep in mind that he will be part of the incoming administration. So anything you say here can and probably will be used against you. What do you have to say?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that it's great that capital is flowing to these markets and these technologies. I think the biggest downside is when capital is misallocated and returns, the capital allocators, the LPs that get all this hype from the VCs that are really super ultra bullish on this space, they lose a lot of money. That's going to have negative downstream side effects. People are going to say, well, the next time when VCs go out to raise 2030, 2035, whatever it is, after they have lost that initial multiple billions of dollars that have gone into DCI, that's all been recapped for one reason or another. It's going to be a harder fundraising environment for those VCs. And, frankly, this is an ecosystem, right? So when you have such an outlier that is a driving mechanism of disproportionate funding, near term, everyone's excited, everything's great, but we will see the consequences if that does not kind of triculate into returns.
Thank you. By the way, you definitely avoided getting yourself in trouble there, so good job. One more question, and then I'll open it up to the audience. Jordi, unless I misunderstood you, I think you said that your firm does not invest in pharmaceutical interventions. And Suraj, since you're part of GSK, obviously there's investment that's going on in drugs. I'm interested to get both of your impressions on the opportunities for neuromodulation or neurotech startups who will be competing in a space where there's already pharmaceutical representation, all right? But maybe it's a drug that's got side effects, or maybe it's a drug that only treats part of the problem, or it doesn't completely, or maybe it's a drug that loses effectiveness over a few years. What's your views on those opportunities? And the follow-up question would be, are there opportunities for maybe combination products? Are there opportunities for collaboration between a pharma firm and a device firm down the road?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would be asking, the size of the clinical effect is the most important factor to determine whether a intervention has to be using a medtech or a drug.
Mm-hmm.
If you have comparable clinical effects, forget about medical devices because they're more expensive, harder to use, or all this. If they are slightly better, also forget it. I don't think there'll be a business case for it because you're not going to get the gross margins, you're going to have the traction. You have to have a good data that shows that this intervention is way much better than anything that you develop with drugs. That could be from the size of the side of the clinical effect or the smaller of the side effect, right? So one of the, but clinical has to be first. If not, I don't think there's any chance. The less invasive the medical device is, the lower the bar of acceptance from prescription, from pricing perspective, etc. So ideally, you would like to have something that is not very invasive or not invasive at all, that has a much large size clinical effect with health economic data that will sustain reimbursement. But that will be the ideal. But in reality, it's like it's always not all these things are checked. One thing personally that I'm very excited about the combination of drugs and medical devices is we invested recently in the company that was mentioned before, Neurotech, which is either a full ultrasound. Full ultrasound is the only medium that has spatial and temporal specificity that can get deep into the brain in a practical way. So while right now these technologies are used for neuromodulation and essentially took almost BD market is storming, and I think BD is next, or a portion of that, not all portion. What is very interesting about ultrasound is that you can use it for neuromodulation perspective, and I think neuropsychiatric disorders that have a complex network effect, all these modulatory things can be very powerful in the future. But going back to the drugs, you can use focused ultrasound to open up locally the blood-brain barrier.
Yes.
And that will allow you to put large molecules that would not pass the blood-brain barrier, and that really you can have a new field of medicine where you need the drug, but you need the device too. At the same time. So that's an example of something we're very excited.
That's a great example. I think there are a couple. There's a European firm and there's also a smaller company called Curve that's tried that similar approach. What can we do to, break down the blood-brain barrier so that we can work in concert with the drug? So I think that's a real interesting opportunity. But Suraj, I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, I guess I break it into kind of 3 categories. So one, there's kind of devices, neuromodulation that is targeting, for example, the sacral nerve stem product, which is looking at highly refractory patients that have already cycled through multiple forms of therapies. They're 3rd, 4th line, and now they really need something that is highly potent. And so you've got kind of a subpopulation of patients where that's applicable, right? So that's category 1, and I think that's probably the most intuitive category. I think category 2 is the category where pharmaceuticals have categorically just been ineffective, right? And we think a lot about CNS and neurodegenerative disease, kind of what are the actual underlying mechanisms and pathology of disease in those areas? Is it a biochemical problem or is it an electrical wiring problem in the brain? And are drugs actually best suited to address those diseases? There is a huge push from the pharmaceutical world into neuropharmacology. There's a number of companies now that are developing the drug development side, kind of early stage, pipeline products for Alzheimer's or what have you. And one of the biggest heuristics they have is brain penetrance, right? How do we get through the blood-brain barrier? Now on the flip side, on the device side, you don't necessarily have to incur those same challenges if you use technologies like magnetic stimulation, direct current stimulation, et cetera. And if you're able to more directly measure kind of the degree of activation spatially within the brain and understand that kind of what exactly are you mechanistically changing about brain activation and the neurons inside the brain. So I think neuromodulation, CNS devices, implantable neural devices, et cetera, can all address these types of deficiencies in pharmaceuticals in that space. And then I think lastly, the drug delivery side is kind of an interesting space beyond just blood-brain barrier too. I mean, I like to think about medical technology categorically as, what are the downsides of pharmaceuticals, right? So you've got systemic exposure to drugs. Can you obviate that by having a better, more specific kind of efficacy profile and safety profile of the product? You also have high cost therapeutics in pharmaceuticals where you've got drugs for RA, for example, that cost, upwards of high 5 figures every year in perpetuity. And so, is there a health economic value being created by the devices that we're putting out into the market beyond just the clinical outcomes as well, through better drug delivery or kind of better targets that enable kind of a set of modality therapies? I think those are all kind of places that neuromodulation and neural devices can kind of supplant or augment pharmaceuticals.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, I'd like to open it up to the audience. Are there any questions for our panel?
Right, thanks, Jim. So raising money is always a challenge, whether you're a CEO of a startup or if you're a fund. Now, Suraj, in your case, you have GSK behind you. You never really had to, actively raise funds. And back in the early days, you remember, Jordy, we didn't have to worry about Advanced Bionics or others because Al would just sign the checks. So tell me a little bit, or tell us about your story of how you raised over $100 million for your first fund, and now you're on your second fund. What was that journey like?
Well, working at Google Help. So, yeah, I don't think I would be doing this if I had to spend, the first thing when I start thinking about this, and I had conversation with VCs and I asked them, give me a pie chart of your time allocation of how you're using your time to do what. And the average LPs and VCs is like, 80 or it's like, so they spend more than half of their time just raising money constantly. I don't want to do that, so I don't want to do that. So, that was not even an option for me because I'm not I don't want to do it. And so through the journey I had at Google, I had the opportunity to be connected with the right people that had similar interests that I had, with financial capacity that is essentially, in a practical sense, not limited. It's only limited by the good ideas and convincing arguments that we do things that matter to the family office that is in most of the one. So that's our game plan. So it's very unique. It's not a common thing, but it just happened. And sometimes in life, I didn't really. Well, I wasn't even looking at these as an opportunity. I wasn't not thinking about becoming a VC yet, frankly. But sometimes life has this thing, right? These terms and opportunities and things come, and the opportunity I saw is that can I help with my 25, 30 years of experience working in this space? Can I be helpful to various companies and ideas to figure out ways to help them so that they can overcome some of the structural obstacles of becoming successful, or particularly the lack of investment in the early stage, for sure. So that's what drove me.
I had a comment if somebody else had a question. I don't want to take the time. But I want to emphasize something. I want to emphasize something that you said, Suraj, that I think is a really important direction in that field, which is this appreciation that there is a stimulus that's appropriate to the tissue that's being modified. And so pharmaceuticals, when it comes to the brain is the best organ at achieving homeostasis and changing the effect of any pharmaceutical intervention. The brain has mechanisms to overcome them. And so the lighter or less invasive things like transcranial magnetic stimulation, EMF, and things that are really appropriate for nerves, the realization that in the field that matching the energy source and the stimulus to the location. So I think that particularly as we get into dealing with pain, where pain is really a whole brain response and not one switch, the appreciation of trying to modify that peripherally in the tissues where it's generated, as opposed, or in the tissues where it is being transferred, is going to come. So I think that was a really profound observation, and it is a way to categorize a lot of the new technologies that are being done to see if the energy matches. Your point about ultrasound is a great light source unless you've got a kidney stone. And so layering and harmonic interaction of different frequencies of energy, I think, is a place where it's right for work with DBS and with other areas.
Yeah, but just one comment on because right now most of the technologies are single point access, right? So it is unlikely that the most effective way to intervene is with being such a complex network effect, or these brain disorders that are not that have a lot to do with how actually the kind of the electrical activity of the brain is is modulated. So what I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think in the future we're lacking technologies that have multi-point access, where you can treat the brain as what it is, which is a complex network, and not just one single entry point to something that magically then you just leave it to the network to figure it out. I think that technology that can do multi-access points will be relevant, but that you'll have to combine also with an understanding and the knowledge of what are you doing, right? Because that is limiting our progress too, the lack of fundamental understanding of how these complex systems work. That's an area we're very excited to functional motivation.
Okay, and time maybe for one more quick question, if someone has one. All right, if not, we're going to say thank you very much to our panel.